If you do what's necessary to keep the individual healthy, their cells are healthy as a byproduct. Does the same thing work at the population level? Namely, get all the population factors right, then what the individuals do or don't do doesn't matter. That's the best way that I can explain why the longest lived country in the world has the most smokers, men smoking among the rich countries.
Welcome, friends, to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything. Food, lifestyle, mental health patterns, thinking and feeling, the environment in which you live and work, medical treatments, pharmaceuticals, nature, culture, politics, and policy, I'll add today because of today's conversation. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, a family nurse practitioner certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine, and I'm here with Dr. Stephen Bezruchka. He has worked as an emergency room physician in the U.S. for over 3 decades and spent 10 years in Nepal. There, he started a community health project a week's walk from the road and set up a remote district hospital as a teaching hospital for Nepali doctors whose training he supervised. Dr. Bezruchka considers how nations and parts of the world attain their health and mortality status. Even though health in the U.S. is now declining absolutely, despite having been one of the healthiest nations 70 years ago, no attention is being paid to consider upstream causes, which are mostly economic and political. He teaches, writes, and talks about population health issues and works to further a broader understanding of determinants of health. His research focuses on how to best create broader awareness, and his activist efforts include co-chairing the Economic Inequality Health Task Force of the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, where he is also a member of the board of directors. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much for having me, Jillian.
It's a real pleasure. I always enjoy conversations with you.
Well, let's get started.
Yes. So you have come a long way from being an emergency room doctor to being a public health renegade. How'd that happen?
How did that happen? Well, in the 1980s, I began to see data that U.S. health, measured by life expectancy or infant mortality, was falling behind other countries, and I didn't know why. We certainly had a state-of-the-art healthcare system, spent a lot of money on that, and so this is around the later 1980s. With my experience in Nepal, I came back here in 1986, and one of the ideas circulating was that for the health of infants and children around the world, mother's education seemed to be more important than anything else. And I couldn't quite put that together. Mm-hmm. I was somebody who conflated the ideas of health and healthcare. I thought it was healthcare that produced health. I thought that, I can't say I thought that, but I had never questioned that. Mm-hmm. It was subliminal. So I led some study tours to Nepal for doctors and medical students here. And I worked with a Nepali counterpart, Shankar Manrai. We were sitting on a rice paddy in the eastern part of the country and having one of these seminars that I sort of led on global health. It wasn't called global health then. And Shankar asked me, why do Bangladeshi men have a better chance of surviving than African Americans in Harlem?
That's a good question. And
I hadn't heard of that. As a matter of fact, Shankar had a better grasp of the literature. This was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1990. This was 1991 that we had this discussion. The fact that I couldn't answer that, and living in the United States, propelled me to say, my understanding of health is not that good. I understood how to provide health care, but not but I couldn't understand what produced health. So I went back to public health school in 1992 to Johns Hopkins, and I went there because it had supposedly the best program with the greatest diversity of people from around the world. And in my application essay, I wrote, I'm trying to figure out what makes a population healthy. I know it's not medical care. I've been doing that for long enough. And so I want to go and study at Hopkins to figure this out, what makes a population healthy. So when I got there, and to understand the declining health compared to other countries in the United States. So I got there, and I learned two things that were really important: social factors and political factors. Nobody ever discussed the U.S. health status in other countries compared to other countries. And although I never asked directly why, it takes you a long time to frame the right questions. But what clearly was true was that, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And so funding agencies weren't asking these questions, namely, why is U.S. health declining compared to other countries, relative to other countries? Anyway, so I left not having my question answered, other than I had two new toys to play with: social factors and political factors. And I came across a study linking economic inequality to life expectancy among rich countries. And I saw the graph and I thought, there's something that really makes sense here. So I began delving into that. In 1995, I was now sure that some measures of inequality, economic phenomenon, were really related to life expectancy as a measure of health of societies. And so as I learned more about it, I wanted to present this to other doctors. So in 1995, I gave my first talk at a doctors' conference talking about poor U.S. health status and the links to inequality. And I thought that when people saw that our health compared to other countries was not that good, doctors, that they'd be eager to do something. It took me about 5 years to disabuse myself of that. Namely, doctors aren't interested in health. Our job is to diagnose and treat. Producing health is much more complex. You've got a headache, so I can give you some medicine for the headache. I can make sure it's not a intracerebral hemorrhage, that sort of thing. So I can treat an individual, and that has very little to do with what produces health in a society. Now, it took me a long time to be able to clarify these ideas, but around 2000, I came to see that I had to look elsewhere if I'm going to interest people in health rather than healthcare. If I'm going to get people to consider health rather than healthcare, I'd ask some of my colleagues, why is this going on? And they say, well, nobody ever taught us about this stuff. So if you're not taught about it, you're not going to take an interest in it. Anyway, so I started teaching about at the University of Washington. My first course, I think, was 2001, a graduate course, then an undergraduate course in 2002. And I sort of refined the idea of looking at the country as the patient. Mm-hmm. So I'm obsessed with trying to understand how different countries achieve their levels of health. Monday, the United Nations published its Human Development Report for 2019. And in there is Table 1, which lists every country and its life expectancy. So these are, and I coined the term Health Olympics back in about 2001. Mm-hmm. Namely, if health were an Olympic event, how would the United States do?
We're doing terribly.
Well, I mean, this shows now among UN countries, we rank 36th in life expectancy.
Our folks who are listening and who can't see this, I will post it, but it's out of 36. We're the losers.
And actually, it's lower than that because Taiwan is not a UN country and it's healthier than we are.
Oh, yeah. So we're just behind Barbados. What is that country?
Czech Republic.
Oh, that's Czechia, is the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
Czech Republic, Chile, Costa Rica, Qatar, way leading, and Switzerland, Singapore, and Spain are next, and Italy and Australia, sorry. And then Iceland and Israel. Fascinating. Yeah. Okay, so we're doing, and you saw this decline starting in the 90s.
No, the decline, okay, I was aware of the decline in the 50s. We were up here.
Yeah.
These numbers were lower.
Yeah.
Life expectancy keeps increasing. But other countries are seeing faster or bigger health improvements than we are.
Okay, we're
until recently when our numbers began going down.
Okay.
So since 2014, life expectancy in the United States has declined. Yeah. And if we had have continued to increase, as our trajectory had showed, we're now about a year behind where we might have been.
Okay.
Well, what does that translate into? Clinical people are used to vital signs of an individual. Your temperature, blood pressure, pulse, oxygen saturation, those things. And you know that a small difference, say if you had a child with a temperature of 41 or 2, because we're 4.5 years, 5 years behind the longest lived. Suppose you had a child with a temperature of 4 degrees above 37, let's use Celsius, 41
so that would be like
degrees, 103
or 104?
105 or so. Okay. You'd be cooling that child real quick because brains don't do very well at high temperatures. And you get febrile seizures, among other things. So we're 4.5 years behind Japan, roughly. What does that translate into? What's our leading cause of death in this country?
Is it heart disease?
Yeah, heart disease. If present trends continue, it'll kill roughly half of us in half of the adults in this country. Suppose we eradicated heart disease as a cause of death. Just gone. Kept the other disease death rates the same. We would gain about 3.5 years of life expectancy. We wouldn't be the gold medalists in the Health Olympics, but we'd be close. So where we are now represents more than eradicating our leading disease killer behind the longest lived country. That should be a cause for concern. To achieve this, we spend more on healthcare than the rest of the world combined. It's about $3.6 trillion. It represents 1/6 of our economy, about 18% of GDP. And it will guarantee paid employment for us, but it doesn't guarantee health.
Yes.
So
what do we do? And that's a wrap. No. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of ways to unpeel this. And one of the reasons that I've been calling you a public health renegade is because I think you're asking more difficult questions. I think the questions that we typically ask about this, looking at statistics like these, are, well, how do we improve our public health outreach, or how do we improve our public health delivery, or but that's not, I don't think that's really...
The real question is, what is public health in this country?
What is public health in this country?
Well, it's a circumscribed set of interventions. Immunizations, stop smoking messages, services for the poor people who can't otherwise access them, and so on.
And early detection, which we call
screening.
Prevention, but a lot of it is early detection for breast cancer, colon cancer, so for a few cancers.
So it's a circumscribed set of interventions, but it doesn't address the key factors that produce health in a society. So healthiest state, our longest lived state is Hawaii. Hawaii produced the Department of Health in Hawaii produced a report on the social determinants of health and chronic disease. And this is the graphic on page 2. And to describe it, basically we have upstream or root causes of health and then the downstream effects on health. And it's got basically a mountain range, a pass in the mountain range, and then a waterfall, and it flows out to the ocean. And the downstream effects are the chronic diseases that you treat. The risk factors are the stuff we tell you to, be active and stop smoking and don't get too big, and access to health care. So these are the downstream effect on a society as the Department of Health in Hawaii might consider. I mean, it is arguably our healthiest state, so it knows something.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are all these factors by this raging waterfall, which are the traditional social determinants of health: poverty, pollution, place, racism, education, income, wealth, and so on. What's above that?
So what's above that is political context and governance and social economic conditions.
So, and political context is above social economic conditions. Mm-hmm. And that suggests what I learned at Hopkins, the political factors are the most important.
What are political factors?
Well, politics is the process by where we decide to share what is ours and the process by which that happens. In other words, as a society, we have forests and a variety of environmental resources. We have the broadcast airwaves. We have rules and regulations for how business is conducted. So those need to, we can decide to share those in various ways. And the process is typically holding elections and having elected officials accountable. Take the broadcast bands, the airwaves. We gave those away to private businesses, and they control the information we receive. Now we have a whole digital media that's out there for which it's a free-for-all. There's no controls on that. You can say anything you want on social media and cause a lot of irate people, and nobody's responsible for that. It's totally a jungle. So we could decide to regulate the media, which comes from, as your computer is basically a technology that the United States government built and paid for in the 1940s. There's a big room at the Smithsonian where the ENIAC is housed, this huge thing that could add a couple of numbers. And so we developed the software to run that. And then when it became profitable, we gave it to private industry to make huge profits on. And the outgrowth of that today is Apple, Google, Facebook. We also developed other technologies that produce the richest person in the world, not just a stone's throw from here. We have basically a delivery man who expedited delivery. So these are the political context is what's ours and how do we decide to care for and share it, and the process by which that happens. And since we have the most inequality of all rich countries, we have the richest people, the three richest people, the two richest people, as I said, are a stone's throw from here. And they basically rode their backs on government-sponsored innovation. They should maybe pay a licensing fee to we the people for this, maybe. But they don't.
So the question, and this is part of the conversation that you and I had when we met by happenstance on the trail a few weeks ago hiking in the woods. outside of Seattle, which was, why are we as citizens kind of all okay with this? Where does that come from? We the people are okay with a few people holding a lot of wealth. We think that, we look even, at a delivery man and we think maybe we'll be that delivery man. Maybe that'll be all of us. All of us have that thinking. Maybe we'll win this lotto. And why do we think that? And why are we okay with that? Why are we not interested in a politics that divides our resources for the benefit of all of us?
So let's look at trends in inequality. I said inequality is the key factor here. Socioeconomic conditions, inequality. The richest 1% in the 1920s had half of all the wealth. We're talking about wealth. And and through a variety of processes, the share of the wealth whittled down in 1975 to about 23% of all wealth, from half to 23. Now they're back to half. How did they get it back? See, so if we look at the inflection point, or the nadir, in 1975, the rich had more than ever before, but their share was less. And the rich always want only one thing throughout history, that's everything. So they pretty well got it back. I like to look at the process by which that happened. There was an article in Business Week. Remember, people used to have these weekly magazines. In October 1974. And I can quote the actual text of the article. It said, "It would be a hard pill for Americans to swallow, the idea of doing with less so big business can have more." It goes on to say, "Nothing in modern economic history compares in difficulty with the cell job that must now be done to make Americans accept the new reality." Let's decode that. Big business has to have more, and we have to have less. And we've got to feel good about it. So what happened was, I came of age in the 60s. It was a time of upset and opposition to the invasion of Vietnam, the civil rights movement, the dreams of a utopia almost around the corner. It was a social revolution, and when you're in it, it's hard to sort of know that that's what's going on. So that people power had to be contained. And the container was to tell us our job is to be consumers. So we have traded working together for ends such as the civil rights legislation, such as taxation rates were very high back starting in the 50s, starting in the 40s. The highest marginal tax rate in the 50s was 91% on the upper chunk of income. Now it's about 38, 39%. So the rich don't want to pay taxes. They had to whittle that down, and they told us in some uncertain terms, your job is, we're not going to pay you more. Your job is to borrow your salary. This is before the crash of 2008, by second mortgages on your home, by credit card debt. Borrow your salary since we're not going to pay you more. And somehow we did that so we could buy all the stuff that we don't need to put in storage lockers that
Yes.
has turned out to be a big industry. So we were basically told that our role was to be consumers, and we had to go into debt to achieve that, and that was what we were supposed to do.
Why did we believe that?
We believed it with a vengeance.
Yeah, why? How? How did that happen?
So advertising has been very, very successful. Basically, it's, we have all these, it's advertising. It's media manipulation. It's, when I was a kid growing up, this is, I became fixated on one particular brand. It was a brand of gasoline. Because they sponsored the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast from Maple Leaf Gardens, Esso, the Canadian equivalent of Exxon. And when my father bought a car, when he finally passed his driver's license, bought a car, I was 16 at the time, I got my license, and I said, Dad, we got to put Esso gas in the car. And he said, no, any old gas is fine. And I said, no, it's got to be Esso gas. So I went and got a job working at a grocery store to put every ounce of gas into the car that I paid for because I had to be loyal to my brand. That's happening today much more powerfully. People have created generic terms for various brands. Where's my North Face? And so on. My Patagonia. We've been effectively sold that our identity is bound up in product. And if that's true, then your job is to consume.
So it's interesting because really what marketing does is associate happiness or stability or sustainability with the brand, right? That's what we're being sold on. So what we're really being sold on is happiness. And one thing we know about human life is it ain't easy. So even if we desire a return to a time, this obviously will never happen, but without advertising or without marketing, or you turn off the television or you turn off wherever you get your media from, you're still not going to necessarily find happiness or peace of mind because that's not kind of our human state.
Remember, the United States is founded with the Declaration of Independence on 3 principles. Life, not necessarily a long life. Liberty, well, we house a quarter of the world's prisoners, so maybe we can contest that too. And the pursuit of happiness. Not the attainment, it's the pursuit. That's the critical thing. We are constantly pursuing happiness. We're falling further behind. I mean, our happiness is no better than our life expectancy. And how do we pursue happiness? By buying stuff.
Yeah.
It's not working. Happiness comes from social relationships. It comes with friendship. It comes with family, friends, doing things together. But people don't do things together anymore. You find a couple sitting at a restaurant and they're texting each other.
Yes. I just heard the statistic that teen pregnancy is down because teens don't see each other anymore.
That's right.
Texting.
Yep. The amount, there's an article in The Atlantic about how we're having less sex.
Yes.
And there's a study comparing Australia and the United States on having sex, and they're still doing it in Australia.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
So what do we do about this component of it?
This component.
So one of the conversations we started a little bit before we even started the recording was about what is public health and what does public health do. So if you were going to create a public health campaign that was going to be truly health focused and was going to address this type of issue, what would it look like?
Well, I think the word public health is outdated. Or I tell people we have public health 1.0, 2.0. We need a public health 3.0. Public health 1.0 was trying to keep the fecal matter out of the food and the water.
That would be nice. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. That was in the 19th century. In the 20th century, it was all the stuff we talked about: immunization, screening, clinics for disadvantaged, behavioral messages, and so on. 21st century public health, or 3.0, ought to recognize the political origins of our health and get us involved in understanding that. I think so I began using the term population health around 20 years ago, since that was a shift in terms. And I said population health is the understanding of the major factors that produce health in a population. And those are, I whittled them down, my simplistic perspective, to two things. One is caring and sharing as measured by economic inequality, and the other is attention to early life. That is, about half of our health as adults has been programmed, most likely in the first 1,000 days after conception, and certainly by the time we go to school. A student of mine who gave an Ignite talk at Town Hall had this, when she did that talk, she had this graphic to illustrate the importance of the first 1,000 days after conception. By the time you're blowing out those two candles, roughly half of our health has been determined through epigenetic mechanisms. So we have to produce a caring and sharing society, mostly by decreasing inequality, and the resources we gain from that we have to spend on early life. What would we spend it on in early life? Well, having time to parent is important. There are only 2 countries in the world that don't give a working woman who is pregnant and then has a baby paid time off. One is, of course, the United States, and the other is Papua New Guinea.
Oh my goodness.
Only 2 countries with populations of 1 million or more who don't have paid maternity leave programs as a national policy.
Yeah.
Go 100 miles north to Canada, you get a year at 60% pay. The pay comes from the government, and the employer often tops it up.
Wow.
Go to Sweden, you get essentially 2 years. The first year, the first 444 days at full pay, father has to take 13 weeks. Second year is optional at 70% pay. And in the third year, you can put your 3-year-old in a Swedish government-run daycare center that's free.
It's amazing.
And the requirements to work in a Swedish government-run daycare center is that you have an advanced degree in play.
Wow.
Because what's daycare? It's socializing the kid, the 3-year-old. You need experts there.
Yeah.
What are our requirements for daycare? Ability to work at a minimum wage.
Yeah.
And no recent history of sexual abuse of children, perhaps.
Yeah.
So you get what you pay for. We don't spend money on early life. Sweden, for example, since I mentioned it, spends more government money on the first year of life than in any subsequent year, because they recognize how important early life is, and that's what we got to focus on our programs and funding. Where do we put our money? Well, if we're going to spend it on early life, we put it in remedial actions for people that, teenagers and people like that. So I can show you graphs of where we spend our money.
Yeah.
This harkens back to a statement by an escaped slave abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, who said, "It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men."
Yes.
But when the 1/6 of the economy is repairing broken men and women, you don't want to mess with that.
Yeah. Do you know the statistics of how much we spend kind of at the end of life in the last few years of life as compared?
The numbers are somewhere in the 60, 70, 80%.
Wow. We talked a little bit also before the recording started about how when I had a baby 5 years ago now, as working full-time and having a baby, I took my 3 months off and then went back to work, and how, God bless him, I love him. He was not a great sleeper, and so for that first probably 2 or 3 years, I was underslept, and that had a greater impact on my health and my life than anything else has ever had. And I have not been a terribly sick person, thank God, knock on wood, but it was remarkable to me about how I couldn't figure it out. I literally couldn't figure it out. And the answer is that it's because it wasn't really about me. There was nothing that I was doing that was necessarily wrong or that I could have necessarily done differently, other than make more.
Raise a child.
Yes.
It's a collective thing.
It is very much a collective. So how do we restore? I mean, if we're going to really break it down, then the conversation we're having today is how do we get public health to restore relationships, give space for citizens to restore relationships, support the transition of the generations. So for pregnant women and new parents to raise children, and how do we politically share our resources in order to direct them to the places that's going to build a strong society?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize or try to define the problem. And again, I think of my own personal growing up era. In 1956, the Russians launched a satellite into space and totally caught us off guard.
Uh-huh.
And such as I would offer, our goal now is to make the rich even more rich beyond their wildest dreams.
Yes.
We passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut. That's actually an underestimate. It's going to be about $4.5 trillion over the next decade to make the rich richer. And they're laughing all the way to their offshore banks. Mm-hmm. That's sort of what we have decided as a society to do, and our declining health shows that it's killing us.
And suicides are up.
Yeah.
And suicides are up. Well, one thing we've already talked about in another podcast, if you've listened, is suicides are up for middle-aged white men and for millennials. So this is not specific to gender. This is not specific to economic status. This is not specific to generation.
The important thing to recognize is you and I might sit here and think this bleak picture that I'm painting doesn't apply to us. We're educated, white skin, make lots of money, practice all the right behaviors. So that applies to them, not to us. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing to get my students to recognize is that that's not true. How can I present that? Well, I can pull a book off the shelf. I will, actually. Read the title.
U.S. Health in International Perspective, Shorter Lives, Poorer Health.
Who produced it?
The National Research Council and Institute of Medicine. Oh, it's from the Institute of Medicine.
Yeah. So this is the highest functioning think tank in the country. And go to page 3. That everything's up front here. And read this paragraph.
So here on page 3 in the summary, the U.S. health disadvantage is more pronounced among socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, but even advantaged Americans appear to fare worse than their counterparts in England and some other countries. That is, Americans with healthy behaviors or those who are white, insured, college-educated, or in upper-income groups appear to be in worse health than similar groups in comparison countries.
Pretty clear.
Pretty clear. We're all going down together.
We are. By the way, the title is I always tell my students, craft a title that says everything. So the lead editor was Stephen Wolf, whom I met when he was here in October at a conference. And I was talking about the title and how much I loved it. And he implied it was really hard to get that title to fly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was. They wanted to put some
long,
some vanilla title that wouldn't really say everything.
Yeah.
So we don't have good health. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying annually that shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not like the shooting where was the shooting that was reported today?
In Pensacola or in?
Yeah, no, 6 people were killed. It was on the, this is every day, so it's hard to remember the latest shootings. Yeah. We're dying from all the chronic diseases that we have. It's like we live in a society with a highly toxic, odorless, colorless, invisible gas.
Yes.
That kills us from the usual conditions, and we're totally unaware of it. So we have to create the awareness, that we're not that we're dying younger, and that the result is these structural factors, these political factors that are producing this. That's going to take a huge effort. When it comes in this book, What to Do, they say, number one, tell the people. Number two, look at healthier countries to see what they're doing that could be of use here. And we tell other countries what they need to know, but we don't learn from other countries.
No, we are not good listeners.
Yeah.
So what do you think, it came home to me when I watched Fahrenheit 9/11, the Michael Moore movie years ago when it came out. And there was some professor sitting in an office with, surrounded by books who said, the best way to keep down democracy is to keep people poor, because then they just keep working and there's no time for action. What do you think about that?
So, Robert Sapolsky, somebody I admire a lot, said that after the advent of agriculture, we invented poverty. And it was because, the Lord could say, produce my food and store it in my castle and be ready to go to war to defend my food. So we had the stratification of society that didn't exist in the hunter-gatherer era. And Sapolsky writes it was the best way to control people was to create poverty. So how do we do that today? Well, we have, through policies, again, political policies, produced a lot of unhoused people. So Seattle has large numbers. Having so many unhoused people actually benefits us. That is, we provide these services for them. You can volunteer and it looks good on your CV. We have a homeless management information system that counts. And the higher the counts, the more money you get. And finally, you can say to yourself, thank God I'm not homeless. It could be worse. So as long as we have the presence of the unhoused, we can be grateful and not try to rock the boat. I mean, we could end homelessness if we wanted to. Because the homeless population occurred in the early 1980s as the president cut funding for low-cost housing and mental health services. So it was a conscious decision. Could be reversed.
So what can we do, as people listening? Where do we start?
So I tell my students, do what you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, you won't do it for long. Do what you have skills at, and do what you can do for a long time without being paid much. So what do I mean by that? Well, we need to, first of all, make aware that our health status is what it is. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You mentioned the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. Find organizations that are championing these causes, and either you might enjoy producing graphics, you might enjoy supporting events, you might enjoy posting on social media. So get this stuff out there. I don't want to keep bringing out books, but one of the things that needs to be done is the government system, the federal government system of taxing and sharing the proceeds of the tax is totally broken. The lowest rate of tax, combined federal, state, and local taxes, the lowest rate is 23% paid by the richest 400 people.
Wow. The
bottom 90%, from 1962 to 2018, have seen their tax rates increase. Top 10% have had them go down, but it's the richest 400 who've seen the biggest drop. That's the argument in that book.
The triumph of injustice.
Yeah. So get informed about these ideas. Obviously, I'm obsessed with these ideas. And
thank God.
And
lucky for us.
And work on that. But pick a cause, get informed about the cause, and work with others, form coalitions. The old, again, African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Mm-hmm. So, I am fortunate in having a variety of groups that I work with mm-hmm. on these issues. And I have some skills, teaching, writing, talking. I'm not very good at graphics, mm-hmm. And when I came back from public health school, I was told back there, don't give up your day job, or as an 8-hour doc, your night job, because that allowed me to make enough money to fund my habit.
Yeah.
It's giving me the perspective that I have, and it's allowed me to ask other questions and try and work on those. Thomas Pynchon wrote in Gravity's Rainbow, they can get you asking the wrong questions. They don't have to worry about the answers.
Yes.
So do we want Medicare for all, single payer, public option? I mean, those are the wrong questions.
Right.
We should be talking about our health and improving it. And countries can set goals for health, by the way. Australia in 2010, when it was third in the Health Olympics, mm-hmm. Because of an article in the Medical Journal of Australia written by some doctors with the title along the lines of, what would it take for Australia to become the healthiest country in the world to beat Japan? Uh-huh. And the government actually formed a commission to study this, and they produced a report in 2010 on Australia becoming the healthiest country in the world. Well, they weren't successful, but nevertheless, it does. And of course, subsequent governments put that idea aside.
Yeah.
We don't want, so it's a tough thing to try and focus on our health and do what's necessary to improve it.
Yeah. Thank you for listening today with Dr. Stephen Bezruchka, University of Washington professor. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. You can also get a ton of fascinating information about Dr. Bezruchka's work from his website at the University of Washington. It's essentially departments.washington.edu, but I'll spell it out for you because it's all abbreviated. DEPTS.washington.edu/EQHLTH/index.htm. And you can find more about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to review this and rate this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and share this with all your friends and family. It is great for conversation and for us to build our collective awareness. And feel free to send topic requests for other podcasts to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com.
Among the various things that I've learned as I have progressed over this is the importance of understanding the effect of abuse in childhood, mm-hmm. adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Mm-hmm. And so people that I know who are involved in clinical care at some form or other with especially chronic pain and other issues recognize how ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, underlie a lot of these issues. Mm-hmm. And there's some people saying, well, we should prevent ACEs. That's kind of interesting because it's like prevention in general in healthcare. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't address the core problems. It kind of sanitizes some solutions or addressing some things. We have the best thing we've got going for us, perhaps, is what are called nurse-family partnerships. Mm-hmm. In other words, for vulnerable people, mostly young pregnant women, have a nurse go into the home on a regular basis, weekly, mm-hmm. and show that they care, and then follow the kids that grow out of that, and they have the best track record for having kids that grow well, do well in school, don't use too many substances as they get older, and so on. Mm-hmm. And it was actually tested by a guy called David Olds, who set up separate communities and had nurses visit in one, no visits in another, or community member visits in a third, and compared the outcomes. Mm-hmm. You know, it takes a decade to do this. And so these are nurse-family partnerships. We don't support them very much. They're in some 2/3 of states in a patchwork fashion. Mm-hmm. Within each state, counties have to beg for money, and so I just recently saw a infographic about the situation in Washington State, and large numbers of counties just don't have any programs. So here's a program to support. Mm-hmm. How do you support such a program? Well, it takes lobbying and concerted public action and an understanding of the political process. Mm-hmm. In my course that's finishing up this quarter for an executive MPH for mid-career folk, they have to produce an advocacy policy brief on our declining health. Many people don't understand how the political system works, mm-hmm. At the federal government level. So I did a little webinar with my the three branches of the federal government, and I'm now incorporating something much more than that in my undergraduate course, since I realize so many students don't have civics classes anymore.
Yeah.
As long as we're teaching to the test, you don't want to teach about that.
Yes.
So some of the students who had in the executive MPH program later communicated with me and they sent me some cartoon videos of things that they were exposed to in high school. Mm-hmm. And one was this sort of animated thing saying, "I'm just a bill."
Oh, yes.
Oh, you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, that's Schoolhouse Rock.
Okay,
I'm
yes.
just a bill up on Capitol Hill. Oh, yeah.
So that's the extent of their knowledge. Yeah. They have these uh-huh. little videos that still stick with them. I'd never seen this before. Uh-huh. It was pretty good. Uh-huh. You know.
Oh, they were very catchy. They were lovely. Okay. I remember them from elementary school in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to create awareness of how the country works.
Yes.
And then what is the role of, well, like Ralph Nader started this organization, Public Citizen. Mm-hmm. We need time to be citizens and understand the process and work together. Mm-hmm. This started in the 1960s when he created Public Citizen. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we have done that are highly effective. It's just that most of them we don't take seriously. For example, the studies on early life. There was the Perry Preschool Project, and there was the ABC Darien Project, mm-hmm. That looked at supporting early life and the beneficial outcomes that come from that. Mm-hmm. We did the research. Other countries have adopted them. We have not.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
Do you think that there's some component in our country about our rugged individualism?
We only understand ourselves when we see ourselves from another perspective. Mm-hmm. Seymour Martin Lipset said, "A person who knows only one country knows no country." So mm-hmm. how can we see ourselves from other shores? Well, in the 1800s, a guy called Alexis de Tocqueville came here from France and looked at American society. And what amazed him was how collective we were.
Huh.
Yeah. So I think, yes, rugged individualism, but we used to work together.
Sometimes the things that we think, just as you're talking about early life, the things that we think and feel when we're young, we carry into adulthood. Sometimes they may no longer serve us, or sometimes we're in a different position where we could make a different decision about how we put forward our social trajectory, but we're really still driven by early thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better. So how can we influence those early thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, and I think those early thoughts and feelings really is based on connection. And
so institutionalize this.
Right.
In England, they have a health visitor.
Yes.
They come around like the nurses do. I mean, that's their job. This is, as you're saying this, I'm thinking to an analogy that I developed some years ago of what makes a cell healthy, what makes a community of cells, such as an organ or a whole human being, healthy, and what makes a population healthy. So we just isolate a cell with its mitochondria and everything else. What does that cell need to be healthy?
Oxygen.
Nutrients, oxygen, maybe some waste disposal. That's all it needs, right? Well, we're just a bunch of cells all stuck together. So surely that's what we need. Oxygen, glucose, some excretory system to get rid of waste. Well, obviously that's not going to work. As we consume more and more glucose, we're getting bigger and bigger. You give adults 100% oxygen to breathe and they get lung disease. Babies go blind. So the best advice for a component of ourselves, a cell, may not be the best advice for the community of cells that comprise a human being. So what's the best advice for the individual human to be healthy? Avoid the usual do's and don'ts, right, that you preach. So that's what makes an individual healthy. What makes a population healthy? A bunch of individuals. Is it we saw that if we aggregated the individual cell advice to the human, that doesn't work. Notice if we do what's necessary to keep the human healthy, eat right, exercise, don't smoke, wear a condom, all that stuff, has no cellular counterpart. Can't tell a cell to not smoke. You can't tell a cell to wear a condom. It's not in their domains of things that they can do. Then we take the individual human health advice and we broadcast it to the population. You've got to tell the population to eat right, exercise, don't smoke, see your doctor, and all that stuff. Are there factors at the population level that have no individual counterparts in the same way that individual health advice has no cellular counterparts? But if you do what's necessary to keep the individual healthy, their cells are healthy as a byproduct. Does the same thing work at the population level? Namely, get all the population factors right, then what the individuals do or don't do doesn't matter. That's the best way that I can explain why the longest lived country in the world has the most smokers, men smoking among the rich countries. So in Japan, half the men smoke. Used to be much higher, but they've been had a public health campaign. And this country, about 18% of people smoke, and it's only the poor that smoke now.
So what are those population factors then?
Okay, so what have we said so far? Well, we've got to attend to early life. That's something you've got to do as a society. And you have to care and share. That's something you do with the political economic structure of a society.
Yeah.
So, and there's another factor that helps explain the Japanese situation. It's not independent, but do you ever see a lone Japanese tourist?
No.
Do you ever see a lone American tourist?
Yes.
There lies the difference.
Yeah.
They do things together.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Yeah.
So we pay the price with shorter lives, poorer health.
And this was the thing we finished our hike on a few weeks ago, which was our epidemic of loneliness. What do we do with that?
Well, yeah, maybe I told you, the United Kingdom has created a ministry of loneliness. I don't know how effective it is. I don't have a ready-made answer for that right now. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
Okay. I can make one up, but basically you need to promote social connections and facilitate that rather than, well, the whole social media landscape, I think, detracts from that.
Yeah.
The technology that isolates us. As Shelley Turkle wrote, we're alone together.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you change that? Well, we can regulate. I mentioned what's ours are the broadcast, are the airwaves, and the ways in which we've given those to various media. We can regulate those in our best interests.
Yeah.
Suppose there's a variety of little ways to try and do that. So in January, the State of the Union address will be made. Suppose the State of the Union, which it's required from the Constitution, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose the State of the Union may put an amendment in the Constitution saying, so we have to compare it with other unions. How is the U.S. Union doing in comparison to Japan or Slovenia? I like to bring up Slovenia because if we had Slovenia's child mortality rate, shows what's achievable, 43 fewer children, give or take a few, would die every day in this country.
Wow.
So Slovenia shows what's achievable, not the lowest child mortality rate. But when I present that, I then say, why did I choose Slovenia besides it being healthier than the United States? Why?
Yeah.
Country of origin of our First Lady.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we should take notice.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I really want to thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, I'm happy to do it.
It's such a joy to talk to you. It's so thought-provoking, and now I have my career. I am a nurse practitioner. I'm not going to change it.
Yeah, but you can do other things, and you are.
Yes.
Look at this.
Yeah, and this is definitely part of it.
Good.
So thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody. Today here with Dr. Stephen Bezruchka, public health renegade, emergency room physician, University of Washington professor here in Seattle. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. Speaking of social media, you can find us at any of these at the Center for Healing Neurology, and you can also get more information from and about us on our website, www.centerforhealingneurology.com, or even better, come see us in person at our Seattle-based clinic. Please be sure to share this show with your friends, and we welcome your rating and reviews wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we're committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.